great to be here. Happy Friday, everybody. I have a little bit of a cold, so if I sneeze during this, I really apologize. I'm really hoping that we don't get one. But so I started Maven 8 years ago, and really the mission of Maven is to fill a lot of the gaps in care and bring better access to care in women's and family health, which typically has been underserved for decades, if not since the dawn of the healthcare system starting. I think, particularly in the last 12 months, seeing Roe v. Wade be overturned and just continuing to look at a lot of the clinical outcomes data in maternal health, that we have a lot of work to do. And so what we do is we operate a virtual clinic across fertility, preconception, maternity, and pediatric care that really brings a lot of different types of providers together, over 30 types, to really plug in the gaps of the existing model. And then we have care navigators that really help you kind of navigate the in-person system. We sell into corporations and payers, so it's a B2B2C model. So we cover about 15 million lives today. We've raised about 300 million of capital. We are the first unicorn in women's and family health last year. And we work with nearly half of the Fortune 15 and almost all of the national payers. So this market is growing a lot right now, which is great to see, given how far we have to go.
That's fascinating. So before I get to my first real question, I do want to ask you about Josh, if it's okay. So,
Sure.
so Josh this morning, he just wowed us, like he normally does, and he's spoken at our events before, so it wasn't a surprise to me. But the level of his intellect and his ability to absorb information and then bring it back. He just described himself as being incredibly intellectually competitive, which I thought was an interesting way to phrase it. Like, what's it like working with him?
Well, so I actually work with Dina, his partner.
What's it like working with Dina?
Dina, I would also describe as competitive. I think that's a common theme in Lux, which is great. But listen, I think Josh, Dina, the whole Lux culture is to go for the moonshots and to really go for the big ideas that can truly change, the industry that you're in and society as we know it, and not just the ones that make incremental improvements. So, thrilled to work with Lux and Josh.
And they had the foresight to understand that what you're doing is a moonshot.
Yes.
And why would they describe it that way? I mean, it seems obvious that it's so needed.
It's not just the business model. We're changing an entire mindset around how the healthcare system views women, how the healthcare system views children, the LGBTQ community, people of color. I mean, it's a big mountain to climb.
So you have what I would call, from my own experience with startups, a non-traditional background to be the CEO of this great building company. You're a journalist for a long time. You're a VC for a shorter period of time. Tell us how you made the transition and why it suits you well for what you're doing now.
Sure. So I will say the common thread in some of this is my dad is an entrepreneur and my aunt is an entrepreneur. My mom helped both of them. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And as I was kind of, working, journalism was what I always wanted to do, and I did for a while. When I graduated college when I was 22, I said I was going to be the next female Hemingway, and I moved to Spain. And I ended up living in Europe for between Europe and Asia for about 9 years. And I think what happened was, as many of you probably know all too well, the media industry was shifting a lot. And so all of a sudden, really breaking those big stories and spending the time, that was not just a day, but months kind of reporting out a story that's not really, there's no business model for that anymore. And instead, so much of media is blogs and clicks. And so I thought, okay, this, and plus the economics of just how much journalists make these days wasn't going to support an equitable household with my husband to allow me to make a lot of, to make decisions kind of equitably. So started kind of trying on some entrepreneurship ideas off the back of stories I was writing when I was out in Singapore. And then I had this great idea at one point, and I was living in Singapore and my partner was living in Hong Kong, and I had no experience at all. And my dad was like, all right, I don't know if this is going to work out. Good luck, but why don't you go learn on someone else's dime? And so that was what prompted the move into venture capital. It wasn't necessarily that I was trying to be a venture capitalist, but it was an incredible kind of MBA, so to speak, in technology. So a lot of the entrepreneurs that I met during those 2 years are either, our friends today, investors in Maven, advisors. So it was amazing. And it was the early days of the London tech scene, so you just had free reign to run around and meet everyone.
And how has journalism helped you in your role as a CEO?
Absolutely. I think approach problem solving still as like I'm reporting out a story. So new product launches, business strategy. And so, you look at all the pieces, you take that high level view, and then you go find, and then you develop a hypothesis, and then you just go gut check it and test it with people. So I feel like, I have some amazing board independents, amazing advisors, and just people in the market that I know that I really value their opinion. And so right now we're in this middle of a new product launch, and this is my favorite part of my job still, is launching new products. And so I'm in the market right now, just talking to tons of people, gut checking. Hey, what do you think about this? And if we did this, what would you buy it? And so that where the market meets product and that intersection is where I love to play.
Do you want to talk a little bit about the new product?
No.
It's still secret?
Yes.
Okay, still a secret. So you started off, you mentioned this earlier, with direct-to-consumer, which is a great play. You transitioned to more partner plays, but you really valued, I think, from what I've learned about you, the direct-to-consumer attitude in serving the customer.
Yes.
Tell us how you're still doing that, even though it's not focused expressly now on direct-to-consumer.
Sure. So now there's a whole word for this, which is B2C to B go-to-market in digital health. So Andreessen's now written blog posts about it, and it's starting to pop up a bit. But really, the reason that we continue to kind of take that approach, and why I think it worked for us is, our product is only as good as the people who use it and the people who like it. And I think to be truly disruptive in healthcare is, there's many things, but you can use technology to build a product that patients use, patients trust, patients love, that's creating genuine value in their lives that they're not getting in the bricks and mortar system. And to do that, you have to have a consumer product. You have to have an app that is as easy to use as Uber and as seamless and Airbnb and as delightful as many of these kind of content and social media and consumer apps. And so when we hire product designers or product managers, we really look from the leading consumer companies. But then, of course, healthcare is an industry where we all kind of still want someone else to pay for it. So, selling into companies that pay for a lot of healthcare health plans, that's really, who at the end of the day is footing the bill. So a lot of our challenge in our go-to-market is to convince those buyers that the way in which they've been approaching women's health, family health, hasn't been working. There's a better and more cost-effective and high-quality way, and that's Maven.
So you might not know it from today. We've had lots of people presenting all day long, but obviously women founders are not a common thing, right? And the amount of venture dollars going to women, very, very low. I'd like to talk, if you can talk to us about any of the struggles or challenges that you faced. You said you raised how much money now?
$300 million.
So that's a lot of cabbage. What were some of the challenges?
Yeah, so I would say that when we started in 2014, so much of raising early stage money is getting someone to believe in your vision and really get excited about your vision. I mean, Dina from Lux, and Josh too, they're like super excited. And Dina specifically is a mom of 2 kids and understands the problems we're solving. Back in 2014 or 2015, before the Me Too movement, before all the venture firms started adding a female investment partner, I was pitching to mostly rooms of men, and where we started was pregnancy, postpartum care, helping women return to work, because 43% of new moms are dropping out of the workforce after having kids. After COVID, where the labor market is represents kind of where women were in terms of labor force representation in the 1980s. It's really bad, right? So, but if you're an investor and you're going to only really bet on 3 to 4 companies a year because you don't have room in your busy board schedule and whatnot, you may like what we're doing, and you may see the value of what we're doing, but you may just be more interested in the self-driving car technology. And so it was just constantly like, all right, who's interested? And then what was happening is, if I could find one of these guys, maybe it was a new dad who was interested, they then had to take it to their larger partnerships, which were all men. Yep. And then there was always 1 to 2 naysayers being like, well, women are fine. Like, they have OBGYNs. What else do they need? So anyways, I don't think it is a coincidence that Someone asked me once, like, we have a mostly female board, and someone was like, well, don't you have a diversity problem? I'm like, yo, dude, I'm just trying to like get these deals done. Like, these are the people who want to invest in our business.
Yeah, which I think that's kind of funny, like the opposite diversity problem, but it serves you very well, obviously, and you don't need to fix it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a problem for you at all. I mean, I can't, I'm a VC also, and I hear pitches from a lot of people, and I just can't really imagine being in the meetings like you were, with just a bunch of old white men. Basically, that's kind of what it boiled down to probably back then, even though it was 10 years ago. And just keep on, did you get just no after no after no? Like how long did it?
No after no after no. And then I go to the bar and have a whiskey and go out the next day, another no. I'm like, this is really crazy. Anyways, yeah, I think when we raised our seed round, we took the approach of, instead of having one anchor check, we just had a bunch of smaller angel checks, because women's health has been underserved for a very long time. So there was no issues finding great female angel investors or great male angel investors that were really excited about it. And it wasn't easy. It took a long list, but we were able to cobble together like $2.2 million is what we raised to try to, to launch Maven. And then, but it was when we went out to the institutionals that we got killed. And so the Series A, it was 40, 50, I don't know. I feel like everyone wants me to pinpoint the number. It's like a really big number of how many no's we got. And I remember we had this wonderful seed fund, female founders fund, that invested in female entrepreneurs. And I was like, listen, I can't meet another investor who I have to spend so much time educating about our problem, because if you don't know healthcare, healthcare is complicated. If you don't know women's health, so it was like this double whammy. So I'm like, I only want to meet healthcare investors or female investors. And I think it's really important when you're an early stage entrepreneur that, I think entrepreneurs are by nature optimistic and hopeful. So I remember walking out of these meetings being like, maybe it's going to work. And then, of course it wasn't going to work if they were kind of tuning out after 10 minutes. And so I just became a lot more discerning about that pipeline.
And did Lux invest in the Series A?
No, they rejected us.
So they rejected you the first time. By the way, you weren't here to hear this morning, but Josh actually said, and I was going to repeat this in my closing remarks, that he remembers everybody who told him no when he's fundraising. So Josh, or not, maybe it wasn't Josh, but the firm. He was okay. So they rejected you, and they came back for the Series B.
Series D.
Series D. So they're like late stage for you.
Listen, every
so they let you do all the hard work, and then they came back.
Yeah, but they had to pay up for that.
Yeah,
so,
of course. I hope so. And how big do you and they think this market can be, like in terms of your company?
Well, I think that if you look at healthcare itself, it's nearly 20% of GDP. It's trillions of dollars. If you look at where a lot of the money is spent, maternity and childbirth is the number one reason for hospitalization in the United States. A lot of people don't know that. But $1 out of $4 in hospitals are babies. If you look at who drives all of the decisions in healthcare, so often the chief medical officer of the home that are caring for their elder parents, that are caring for their kids, that are having babies, is usually the woman. So women drive 80% of the decision making in this industry. So they have tremendous purchasing power. So I think that as the healthcare industry shifts into value-based care, all of a sudden you have to care about the consumer. And the consumer is predominantly a woman here. So how big is this industry? It's enormous.
Right. And so how big do you think Maven could get?
I would hope that we can get market caps of tens of billions of dollars. That's certainly why a lot of our investors, that's what our investors see as well and want. I think that the best businesses in the world, you have to pick an entry point and you have to do it really well. Amazon started with book selling, but they had a much larger vision around, e-commerce, supply chain, being customer obsessed and transforming the online, commerce industry. And so I think with us, we are starting with women's health, one of the most underserved areas that I think is still very misunderstood, women's and family health. It's our entry point. We're doing a lot, and the sky's the limit, because I think this whole system needs to change from the ground up.
Yeah, and as your journey continued through all those no's and the Series A, B, C, was D your last one, or have you gone further? You still
D is our last one.
D's your last one for now. Okay. What made you think along the way? Like, what was the turning point or the tipping point that you said, okay, Maven's going to be successful? Like when did that happen? Because it clearly must have.
Yeah.
All those rounds and raised $300 million.
I think the turning point. So I in the beginning, I mean, I also, you're an entrepreneur, you launch a product, and you hope it's going to work. But I'm pretty pragmatic. I mean, I think as an ex-journalist, you really do want to try to see the world with as little rose-colored glasses as possible. But I feel like I knew personally that it needed to work when, even though we had a small group of early customers, they really liked the product, and we were doing something that they couldn't get elsewhere. And the needs were vast. Like I've had 3 kids, I've had 1 miscarriage, I've been through my own journeys, and yet I still am learning about other friends going through these journeys that are just different. And I can't even tell you, like, I not only learned so much about healthcare, I learned so much about like fertility and pregnancy and pediatrics. So I think when I realized that it was going to be a big business was, so once we got the consumer engagement and the consumers really liked us, then we actually had to prove clinical ROI, because you can't work in healthcare when we have such a bloated system. And I mean, costs are skyrocketing. It's actually pretty sad, right? If there's supposed to be this digital health revolution, if we're supposed to have innovated in healthcare in the last few years through the pandemic, costs are higher than they've ever been. Inflation is part of it. But where is the promise of digital health in this? And so anyway, so you have to bring costs down, and maternity is an area where there's a lot of high costs, same with fertility. So when we started seeing the results from some of our claims-based studies and some of our clinical studies where we had done something that patients really liked and needed and trusted, and it was driving costs down and better health, like making people healthier, that's when, and then it was being validated by, big employers and big payers, and no one else can do it. That's where we're really, really excited.
It's fabulous. A lot of your growth has happened over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I would say we raised our Series B in late 2018. So the first 4 years were a total slog, and then things really started to change. And
now you've been through the pandemic. You've grown the company through the pandemic. How many people do you have at Maven?
We're about 500.
Okay, and is it
50% New York, 50% remote.
Okay, so 50% New York in an office.
Yeah.
What was it like growing the company in the pandemic? I really want to get to culture.
Yeah.
Like, how did you as a CEO successfully build the culture of the company even in this hybrid scenario?
Sure, I don't remember anything of the last 2 years, but no. So what was it like? It was intense and continues to be intense. I mean, one of the reflections that I was having the other day, like, we're still hiring a certain amount right now. And, I'm meeting these great candidates in the market for these great roles, and they're so burnt out. And they're like, I just need to take a personal sabbatical still for like 6 months. So there's just a lot going on in the world still. But I think one of our growth really continued to accelerate through the pandemic. So yeah, I think our team was scrappy, our team was innovative. In some ways, we were the perfect size because we had some systems and processes built. We actually had a product built. So by the time the growth came, even though we were remote and navigating this new world, the team really rose to the challenge. I think, Maven is a very, very mission-driven culture. And so I think that helps carry you through some of these kind of, tougher times. And now we're kind of finding our way back to a hybrid work culture that, is not easy, and there's still a lot of unknowns, and we're just kind of, muddling through. And
so what are the most important aspects of your company's culture to you?
Sure. Well, I think there's company-wide values, and then I think there's operating values. So our company-wide values, we actually just did a big refresh after the pandemic, because we're like, okay, what kind of, where are the values that stay true? Like, keep healthcare human. That value has been, in existence since the start of the company. And what are values that we need to kind of adjust? So one is kind of lead with data. That's a new one that we've put in because we have so much data now. And so we want, really data-driven decision makings. Or another one, embrace the service mindset. It means that, not only are we serving clients, are we serving providers, are we serving patients, but teams at Maven are also serving each other because we're growing, and we're growing this business together. One is, continuously learn, including about yourself. I think that growth mindset trait is so critical. When people come to Maven and don't work out and they're not a culture fit, it's usually because they come with a fixed mindset and they think, well, I know how to do this, and so I'm going to come to Maven and do it, versus jumping into a high growth business where the category's changing and the market's changing and having to just continuously adapt, and then reflecting on your own process of how that's happening. So these are some of our core business values. Operating values, I think and those are the values that we have, for instance, at our exec culture and how we run meetings and really how we come together. That too, like learning and curiosity is just paramount, because nothing should be like, it's part of, if you're disrupting healthcare, you can't just say, oh, well, this is how it works, and so now I'm going to do it this way. You have to say, is that the right way for it to work? And so anyway, so that's a constant among both sets of values.
So if you're interviewing, I'm guessing you don't do all that much interviewing now?
Oh, I do it all the time.
So for all levels, or?
No, senior levels and above, yeah.
Tell us, like, say, top 3 qualities that you look for besides intellect and knowledge of the space in the company.
Sure. So, I mean, it's curiosity and learning. I think one of the ways I judge a candidate is what questions they ask me. So, how much have they been thinking about the problem? And even if they haven't been thinking about it, and don't know much about Maven, and I give them a kind of 3-minute overview, there's still like 10 interesting questions they can be asking. So I think that represents curiosity. I definitely look for a self-awareness. So self-awareness, and I'll like throw them curveballs like, hey, like, who's your best relationship? Who's your worst relationship, and why?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if you have favorite interview questions.
Oh yeah, totally.
One of them? Okay.
Yeah. You kind of like if they demonstrate a ton of self-awareness already, I won't throw as many of them out, or you'll kind of give them 3 traits, and I'll be like, stack rank yourself on them, and you'd be surprised. Like 50% of people are like, I'm good at all of them. Like, that wasn't the question. But that's a good like lens into how it comes to work.
So that was 2. Yeah, we have curiosity, self-awareness.
Oh, another one I really like is tell me about a time you disagreed with your boss, and how did you resolve it? And so when the candidate says, they were so wrong, and let me just tell you why, versus, oh, their perspective was this, and so I really wanted to understand their perspective, and they demonstrate that empathy and that empathic problem solving, and this was my perspective, and that's okay if they're like, even though I was right, at least they were like trying to understand the other point of view versus just hammering their point.
Yeah. So another question I have is, for the first, whatever it was, 4 years, and it was a slog through your A round and pre-seed, like, it was probably like multiple problems every day. Like, I'm just envisioning, I describe VC as basically dealing with multiple problems every day, and the good things happen eventually. Have the number of problems gone down as the company's gotten more mature, or have the number of problems just become more mature in terms of like the types of problems?
I mean, I think even at the biggest companies in the world, there's a million problems every day, right? So I don't think problems ever go down, and I think that's why business is so fun and interesting, is because there's just constant problem solving. But I think what's different about it, my husband just started a company, so he's in the early stages. And he's in that like existential part of business where he's like facing down his own survival at the moment, and it's sheer man hours that are going to help him succeed. If I can go on vacation for 2 weeks and like Maven's not going to die, so that's great. That was not the case in the early days.
But he can't go on vacation.
No, kind of, yeah.
Just go on vacation with somebody else, or take the kids.
Yeah. We're like, we have a little hand. Like, okay, a year or 2 with it. He did it for me. Anyways, so no. But the problems now, I think, are in some ways a lot more fun, because they're big, meaty business strategy questions. When you're, at least in our market in the very early days, it was just survival. It was, okay, we have this big vision for a new virtual care model and a new model in general. And that was multi-year product roadmap.
Talk a little bit about fertility benefits.
Sure.
And what you guys are doing for them, and why they're important in the workplace.
Sure. So I think if you think about the fertility market, I always like to know the history of things to try to understand the present. And fertility, the first time a payer ever covered a benefit was actually only in 1990. So very, very recently. And they were doing that because if you had a diagnosis of infertility, whether it was PCOS or endometriosis, and you truly couldn't get pregnant, Massachusetts was the first state to say, okay, we're gonna reimburse for this, but you had to have that diagnosis. So it was very exclusive because, if you were gay, you didn't access it. If you didn't have the right doctor who was writing you the right note, it was just really hard to access the benefit. So then over the last kind of 10 years, a lot of what's happening in the fertility market is there's been tons of innovation at the clinic level to make that path to success to a pregnancy just better and better and better, and those rates are better. On the financial side, it's so expensive. The average cycle is $20,000 to $25, and it takes $20,000 to $25,000, and it takes on average like 2 to 2.5 cycles to have a baby. So a lot of money. Over the last 10 years, Maven included, a lot of companies have brought more financial innovation to the space. So we process reimbursements. We help companies say, oh, I want to offer a surrogacy benefit, an adoption benefit, and a fertility benefit. So you don't need a medical diagnosis. You can just have this benefit. And I think what's really exciting right now is this third wave that we're in. They really care about clinical outcomes. So it's not just, hey, we're going to give you a bunch of money and good luck and go find a good clinic and go find, the right doctor and good luck, and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. It's how do you actually make sure that patients are putting themselves in the best position to get pregnant. One of our fertility doctors, who's a medical director at Maven, says, unfortunately, the fertility industry makes money on mediocre fertility care because the cycle is so expensive that, weirdly, the profit incentive is that if you have 3 cycles, that's terrible for a patient, but the clinic makes more money than if you have 1 cycle. And so right now, demand greatly outstrips supply because there's only about 1,300 fertility doctors in the US, and the market is just, particularly because so much financing has come online, is exploding. So the clinics in some ways actually don't have any issues around, they don't, because there's such a supply-demand mismatch, the clinics aren't the ones pushing the, inappropriate care. They don't want to give someone 3 cycles because they're also measured against their success rates. However, I think one of the things that we're watching and we are making sure that our patients really know is that there's more kind of companies coming into the industry that are kind of fear-mongering to try to drive more IVF because they make money. And so that's something that we are always kind of on the lookout for and it's just so fascinating how fast this moves. It's like 5 years ago or, 8 years ago, my best friend, she only has 1 child because she had 4 cycles, she had 1 child, and she couldn't afford anything else. And there was no more money, through her company. And now people are getting the money through their company, but, a startup fertility clinic with a doctor that doesn't necessarily have a track record of outcomes, how many cycles is that going to take? And is that the right way to help that patient? So there's just a lot going on.
It just sounds like there's battle after battle after battle. And you're clearly in an industry and leading the industry where, it almost feels like it could be depressing sometimes, right? So how do you get over that? You seem to have great energy. There's no question, but it takes a lot of mental fortitude.
No, this is a part of healthcare where there's so much joy, actually, because even in fertility, even if you've had a few failed cycles, there's still that excitement for when you get the baby, right? Pregnancy, you're there's so much joy in having a child. There's so much, it's complicated and whatnot. So no, I actually think this is a good part of healthcare to work in.
But is there resistance to offering this type of stuff? Is there resistance towards making women's health better?
I think that, yes, there was in the early days. Yeah. Now, even states, for instance, in red states in the South that have very restrictive access now to women's health, they might not have abortion access, for instance. Those states often also don't have, they spend a lot of money on pregnancy because a lot of those pregnancies might be high risk. They might be in lower income populations where there's not as much coverage through Medicaid. And those states are now looking down the barrel of thousands of more pregnancies that they can't even afford. And so what we're seeing is even in Medicaid, those states are oh my God, I have to do something here because I can't afford all these pregnancies now. And so I think it's this really exciting time where there's an urgency, there always has been urgency on the patient side, but from an industry side, like even some of these really restrictive policies economically make no sense. And now they're like, oh my God, I'm not gonna have a workforce. I'm not gonna be able to pay the dollars in Medicaid. The companies are like, I have to support global fertility benefits because I'm not gonna be able to retain my talent if I don't do that. So there's all of these business and economic cases that are driving that urgency. So it's actually great. And we still have buyers who will buy from us and be like, all right, I'm buying it, but I still don't understand the value here. And then they like see what people do, but then they see people using a product and what they're saying, and they're like, oh my God, I didn't even know the depth of need here.
Right. It sounds like there's a big educational curve.
Yeah.
Which obviously I think
in the early days I had to do it. Now we have a wonderful sales team doing it.
So I also just read that you launched a menopause product.
We did, yeah.
Do you want to talk about it a little bit about it?
Sure. That was an example where sometimes people ask, how do you decide your product roadmap? And I think it's a combination of, we have our North Star and we have our long list of stuff we want to launch that our patients are asking for and that we just think are important. And then we have the market, and the market's asking us for things. So menopause was one where the market asked. And we had a client advisory board meeting in Q1. We had started to hear rumblings, and there was this commission in the UK in the fall where the UK said, hey, we want to be the leading country in the world on how menopause affects women in the workplace. And so they launched this commission. And so everyone started talking about it in the UK. For global employers, that made its way back to, US benefits teams that were kind of funding these multinational kind of benefits. And so anyway, we asked, client advisory board members like, Microsoft or Bank of America, some of these big employers who are on our client advisory board were like, would you be interested in something like this? And are you hearing your employees ask for it? And they're like, yes. And so we're like, okay, great. And because at our core, our DNA is we're a technology company. So we have a platform and so we're able to launch it within 4 months. I was shocked. Healthcare is typically a slow industry. I was shocked at how much it sold. So we cover over 1 million lives, over 100 clients use us globally. So, and this is like, we launched it 10/1. So it's, and we started selling it like in June. So, but it's I think, we're anticipating a lot of sales next year.
What is the actual product?
So it's a combination of the actual problem is very different for each woman going through menopause. So some women, might experience symptoms around hair loss or hot flashes or sleeplessness. And so depending on what their symptoms are, depending on whether they have a severe hormone imbalance and they need medication, or they can kind of just manage through herbs or whatever it is, that's where talking to a doctor who can help you. So we have a bunch of OBs on our platform who specialize in menopause. One of the stats that I find so crazy is that 3 out of 4 women who go to their doctor when they're going through when they're in perimenopause, premenopause, and they tell them about their symptoms, they're not treated. So 20% of medical students that are going through OB right now don't see menopausal women. So there's just wow, this is such an underserved and part because all of 100% of women go through this. So it's a big part of the population. So our product is a combination of getting that support from providers who know we do write prescriptions for hormone replacement therapy, and then also just kind of destigmatizing and demystifying it. So we have communities of women connecting with each other. We have virtual classes around menopause and what your symptoms are. And I haven't gone through it yet, but I can certainly remember when I got pregnant for the first time, I had no clue what was going on, and I'm a pretty educated person, and so I imagine menopause is going to be the same way, and that's certainly what we hear from so many of our members so far.
Makes a lot of sense. This has been fantastic. Let's have some audience questions. Who we got? Anybody? See one in the back? I see one hand here, one hand here. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, first year MBA student and also clinician, so thank you for speaking to us. I wanted to ask, how was your process before you had data? You mentioned that you have a lot of data, which is such a big deal considering everything is outcomes-based in healthcare, and with payers, really cracking down on outcome-based practices. What was it like when you didn't have much data at all and you were kind of on your feet and were you using journals? How did you guys get what you needed to be able to go in front of VC investors and get seed money and things like that?
Well, yeah, great question. Luckily, in the early days, our KPIs that we were trying to kind of prove and show the VCs was not around clinical outcomes because we were too young of a company. It was all around engagement and like kind of consumer NPS of the product, because our whole thesis was, if you actually crack the holy grail of healthcare, which is drive patient engagement and drive patient trust, and you're in an industry where outcomes, that there can be actually a lot of movement towards a lower cost model of care, then you can drive the outcomes. And so we have this wonderful chief medical officer now, but he didn't join us until last year. We didn't need him, right? And we only really needed him when we had enough data to say, okay, we're ready to do the studies. And so we're now like producing a ton of studies. He's created this, this scientific fellows in Maven where, academics come in and they look at our data and they're doing the studies. And, it's both on clinical outcomes, but even on just kind of, there's this really cool one that's going up soon on digital phenotypes, like the type of person and how they use Maven. We see that Black patients use Maven 2 times the white patients. That's amazing. But we didn't have all of that data, 3-4 years ago. So I would say the advice is, we had medical directors and we always had a medical advisory board so that we were inputting that into our product roadmap, but we didn't really hire a CMO and a big clinical team until a few years ago.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Over here.
Hi, I loved your presentation. I'm Hank Schiffman. Kate, you mentioned that sometimes VCs consult the partnerships that invest in the VCs. And that surprised me because, I thought the VCs are getting the big bucks for making some decisions. So I wonder how common is that? And maybe Zach knows as well. And does that mean that if you're seeking money from a VC, maybe you should do some research to see who their partnerships are and what they've invested in?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's actually more of you meet an individual partner at a VC firm, and then the way that the investment process goes is the individual partner writes the investment memo, and then they bring you in front of the broader partnership, which might be a partnership of 10 VCs, and then they vote. So like Sequoia, who led our Series B, they have to have a unanimous kind of consent around investing. So every Sequoia partner needed to be super excited about what Jess Lee had put together on her investment memo, and then my pitch to the partnership. But VCs do, consult partners, right? As they're going through the process, they'll consult, benefits consulting firms or doctors or employers to try to understand the market and how, it's like they see all the data in our pitch deck, but then they want to kind of go validate it. So I think that's just part of the investment process, the expert call, so to speak.
Yeah, and you may have misunderstood what she said before, but VCs rarely seek advice from their investors.
Yes, they don't, from their LPs, they don't seek advice.
Invest in the fund, and we don't want their advice on what we invest in. That's why they're limited partners. And there's also liability associated with it, which they don't want. So they're over here and they give us the money and then we invest it and make the decisions. I saw another hand. Yeah, Amanda.
Hi, thank you, Kate. I'm Allison Adams, EMBA 23, and I love your product. I joined my current company because of the parental leave and women's benefits that it offers. So my question is, at what point in the company journey did you decide to take this, to move the product to be an employer benefit, and what sort of obstacles did you face in that?
Sure. So luckily, I always knew we needed to be one. Because working in venture capital, I had been looking at digital health companies and working with digital health companies in like 2012, 2013, where, you started to see Omada or PillPack. These were some companies that they were selling consumer, it wasn't quite working, and they started selling employer benefits. So we launched in 2015. So by that point, it was actually it was like becoming an industry. So for us, in our pitch decks very early on was always that we're going to be we started in maternity benefits, then we expanded to family benefits. And so that was just in our pitch decks, and it was kind of like a tiered kind of path. So we sold our first employer 6 months after we launched. It was the Clinton Foundation. That was like a friend of a friend who introduced me to the benefits leader. And then, this second company that we sold, which was crazy, they had $1 million maternity claim and they Googled us. And then we were the only company doing something like this. It was an auto shop in North Carolina with and we're like, yeah, we'll sign a contract with you. do we have a contract? And that was, so we sold that very shortly after the Clinton Foundation. And then we sold, so it was just kind of like that. The first 10 employers, it was very slow. And then all of a sudden, I would say around 2016, 2017, that's when there was a more of an industry of employee benefits that were kind of digital health led. And B, like return to work started to be kind of the hot button issue because it was right around the 2016 election and there was the Me Too movement and everyone started talking about the lack of gender representation at the top of corporate America. Simultaneously, fertility benefits, no one had them, and it was an equity issue for the LGBTQ community particularly. And so we had our first Fortune 50 give us a verbal in 2017, and then we contracted with them in 2018 and launched in 2019. And so we started to really get pipeline in 2017. But I'm very much an outsider of this industry. The first 3 years I was like, what, Salesforce? Can't we just use Excel? Like, I don't want to pay for that. And
You're being scrappy. Any more? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, Kate. My name's Stephanie. Thanks so much. I loved hearing you talk. I was actually listening to one of your podcasts this morning, and it was talking about how C-sections are actually like more beneficial for the doctor and how there's the money-making side of the decisions that you as a woman go through. And I'm expecting my first, and I have friends going through IVF and IUI, and something that we're all feeling is this lack of trust from our doctor's advice. Like, I don't know how to trust necessarily what the doctor is advising me, because is it the money perspective or is it really like the best thing for me and my baby? How do you find Maven is kind of looking at that problem of like the trust between the patient and the doctor?
Well, so one of the best ways I think our patients use Maven is they're actually asking these questions. First of all, I would hope everyone just asks these questions directly from their doctor. I personally did that, right? When I went to my first OB visit when I was first pregnant, I was like, so, how do you view C-sections? I really don't want a C-section. So it's really important for women to advocate for their preferences and ask all these questions from the doctor that's seeing them. But the reality is, sometimes they just don't get the answers that they're looking for, or the doctor doesn't have as much time. And so that's where, with Maven, you actually can book appointments with an OB, usually within 10, 20 minutes. I actually had this very cool experience last night. My au pair, who's not pregnant, had an issue. And so I sat her down and I'm like, oh, here's my product. You're going to see an OB in 10 minutes. And she sat in my dining room and talked to her and got her issue resolved. It was a birth control issue. So that's where, before you go in to your doctor or afterwards, if you want to validate something, you can actually build a relationship with an OB on Maven or midwife or doula or all three and ask all of these questions. We have fertility nurses, reproductive endocrinologists. When I had a miscarriage, that was how I entered my family building journey. I accidentally got pregnant, and then no one in my family that I knew at the time had a miscarriage. And then 11 weeks later, I had a miscarriage, and I didn't know why. And oftentimes, sadly at Maven, I was talking to one of our colleagues who just had a miscarriage this past week, and she was so devastated because when a woman has a miscarriage, they don't tell you why, and particularly if it's your first one, you're wondering if something's wrong. Am I not going to be able to get pregnant? And so I actually, when that happened, I just launched Maven, and I talked to, I think, 6 different types of providers on Maven: midwives, OBs, and doulas. And for them to just kind of say over and over and over, oh, you're fine, really, 20 to 25% of pregnancies end in miscarriage. And if you stop feeling symptoms at 7 weeks, then you probably miscarried at the typical range. It just took your body a little bit longer, for you to actually process the miscarriage. And my in-person doctor did not say that. It was a terrible experience in a hospital in New York City. And so, that's an example where, from an emotional health standpoint, my process was I just wanted to talk to a lot of experts, and I wanted many voices to tell me that everything was okay. And I actually got a bit of insight from one of the providers who said, oh, your symptoms stopped. You're totally fine. And then I had 3 healthy kids and no more miscarriages. So it was all fine. But I think that in such an impersonal system, if you don't have that really tight relationship with your doctor, that's where Maven really comes in.
We have another one over here.
One more. Where are they? Go ahead.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us. My name is Dorothy. I have a startup here at Cornell Tech. And my question was for you, what advice would you give for founders today who are dealing in industries that have stereotypes attached or have these learning and educational curves?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I hope you like a good whiskey. But I would say, if you like a good challenge, and maybe there's like a sadistic part of me that's like, oh, another no, I'm gonna get to that yes. Like it gets that chip on your shoulder going a little bit, that when you actually then get the yeses and you make the breakthrough, it's like really rewarding. But it is, I mean, it's if you're in one of those industries, I think you have to really just, one of the things I always did is I would practice my pitch to a lot of men. In the early days, straight men, didn't know anything about women's health. And if I was using jargon, or if I was like complicating the message, or quite frankly, using too many patient stories that was a little in their face, if I told those miscarriage stories, investors don't want to hear them. Maybe female investors do. I don't know about many male investors. And so that's where you just simplify the story, and you make sure that you practice that. And so one of the things, I work really closely with our VP of product marketing still. I love product marketing because that's where you have to make this story come alive to so many different audiences with so many different stakeholders, so I would just really pay attention to that, and then practice, simplify.
Excellent. Kate, thank you so much. It's been so much fun.